The ice cracked at 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday in January. Declan Fraser was 7 years old, and he had walked exactly 37 feet onto the frozen Henderson Mill Pond to retrieve the basketball his father had given him before the surface gave way and dropped him into water so cold it drove the air from his lungs, his winter coat dragging him down, his fingers clawing at ice that broke away in his hands. The pond silent, the mill abandoned, the neighborhood empty. Nobody there to see him fall. What happened after a biker named Solomon Achebe was riding the back roads to avoid traffic and glanced at the pond at exactly the right moment to see a small hand gripping cracking ice. After he crawled across groaning frozen surface to reach a child he'd never met and pulled him from water that would have killed him in minutes, proved that being in the right place at the right time is never an accident. That one person seeing what nobody else saw can be the difference between life and death, in that the chains of rescue we start today reach people we will never meet. The ice cracked at 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday in January. Declan Fraser was 7 years old, and he had been told 1,000 times not to walk on the pond behind the abandoned mill. His mother had warned him. His teacher had warned him. The faded sign at the edge of the property said, "Danger, thin ice," in letters that had been there so long they were barely readable anymore. But the pond had looked solid. It had been frozen for 2 weeks. The older kids from the neighborhood had been skating on it just 3 days ago. And Declan's basketball had rolled across the ice after a bad throw, coming to rest exactly 43 feet from the shore, close enough to see, too far to reach without walking out. He had been so careful, testing each step, listening for cracks, moving slowly, the way he had seen people do in movies. The ice held for 37 feet. Then it didn't. The sound was like a gunshot, a sharp crack that split the silence of the winter afternoon. Declan felt the surface give way beneath him, felt the shock of water so cold it drove the air from his lungs, felt himself plunge into darkness that swallowed him whole. He tried to scream. The cold stole his voice. He tried to grab the edge of the ice. It broke away in his hands. He tried to kick, to swim, to do anything, but his body had stopped responding, muscles seizing in the freezing water, his winter coat dragging him down like an anchor. The pond was quiet. The mill was abandoned. The neighborhood was empty. Nobody saw him fall, except one person. Solomon Achebe was 51 years old, a retired Army medic who had been riding with the Iron Covenant MC for 19 years. He had seen death in places most people couldn't pronounce, held dying soldiers in desert sand and mountain snow, learned to stay calm when everything around him was chaos. He had retired from the military at 32, spent years struggling with what he'd seen, and found his way to the Iron Covenant through a VA support group that met in the basement of a church on Thursday nights. The club had saved him, given him brothers who understood without needing explanations, given him purpose when the nightmares made purpose hard to find. On this particular Thursday, Solomon was riding the back roads outside of Millbrook because the main highway was backed up and he had a meeting at the clubhouse in 40 minutes. The route took him past the old Henderson Mill, a crumbling brick building that had been abandoned since the 1980s. Its pond a known hazard that the town kept saying they would fence off, but never did. He almost didn't see it. The winter light was fading, the sky that particular shade of gray that made everything blend together. But something caught his eye, a flash of color on the white expanse of the frozen pond, a shape that didn't belong. Solomon slowed his bike, looked closer. A hole in the ice, jagged edges, and next to it, barely visible, a small hand gripping the edge, fingers white with cold, slipping. Solomon was off his motorcycle before his brain finished processing what he was seeing. Hit subscribe if you believe that being in the right place at the right time is never an accident. Comment the name of your city. And share this with someone who needs to know that sometimes one person seeing what nobody else saw is the difference between life and death. The distance from the road to the pond was approximately 90 feet. Solomon covered it in seconds, his boots pounding frozen ground, his mind already calculating. Small child. Submersion time unknown, but likely under 2 minutes, based on the hand still gripping. Ice thickness insufficient to support adult weight. Air temperature 23 degrees. Water temperature approximately 34 degrees. He had maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia became irreversible. Maybe less. At the edge of the pond, he stopped. Forced himself to stop even though every instinct screamed at him to run onto the ice and grab the child. Running onto thin ice would mean 2 victims instead of 1. He dropped to his stomach, distributed his weight, began crawling across the frozen surface, moving toward the hole, where a small hand was still clinging, still fighting, still alive. The ice groaned beneath him, creaked, protested. "Hold on," Solomon called out. "I'm coming. Hold on." The hand didn't respond, couldn't respond, but it was still there. 30 feet, 20 feet, 15. The ice cracked again, a sound that made Solomon's heart stop, but it held, barely. 10 feet from the hole, he stopped, pulled off his leather belt, extended it toward the child. "Grab this," he said. "Grab the belt and don't let go." A face appeared above the water. A boy, maybe 7, lips blue, eyes wide with terror, movement sluggish with cold. He tried to reach for the belt. His arm barely moved. Solomon inched closer. The ice protested louder. "Come on, kid, you can do this. Grab the belt." The boy's hand closed around the leather. Weak. Barely a grip. It was enough. Solomon pulled, slow and steady, distributing the force, feeling the ice shift beneath him, but hold. The boy's body emerged from the water, inch by inch. Waterlogged winter coat dragging. Limbs limp, but breathing. Still breathing. The moment the child was fully on the ice, Solomon began the agonizing crawl backward, dragging the boy with him, moving toward shore 1 foot at a time, while the frozen surface groaned its warnings beneath them. They reached solid ground at 4:23 p.m., 6 minutes since the fall. 6 minutes that would have been fatal if Solomon hadn't taken the back road, hadn't glanced at the pond, hadn't seen what nobody else was there to see. The boy was barely conscious. His skin was gray-blue, his breathing shallow, his body shaking with tremors that were actually a good sign, Solomon knew. Shivering meant his body was still trying to warm itself. It was when the shivering stopped that you really worried. Solomon stripped off his leather jacket and wrapped it around the child, pulling him close to share body heat. He fumbled for his phone with numb fingers, dialed 911, gave the location in the clipped, precise language of someone who had called in emergencies before. Child through the ice at Henderson Mill Pond, approximately 7 years old. Submersion time, estimated 2 to 3 minutes. Conscious, but hypothermic. I have him on shore and am providing warming. Send ambulance and notify hospital for cold water immersion protocol. The dispatcher confirmed. ETA 12 minutes. Solomon looked down at the boy in his arms. His eyes were open but unfocused, his lips moving without sound. "What's your name, buddy?" Solomon asked, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "Can you tell me your name?" The boy's mouth formed a word. Declan? Is that your name?" A tiny nod. "Okay, Declan, I'm Solomon. I've got you. You're going to be okay. Help is coming. You just need to stay awake for me. Can you do that?" Another tiny nod. Then, my ball." Solomon almost laughed. "Your ball." Declan's eyes drifted toward the pond. On the ice. I was getting my ball." Solomon followed his gaze. 40 feet out, resting peacefully on the frozen surface, as if nothing had happened, was a basketball. "We'll get your ball later," Solomon said. "Right now, we need to focus on keeping you warm. Tell me about the ball. Is it your favorite?" Declan nodded weakly. "My dad gave it to me." "That's good. Keep talking to me about your dad." "What's his name?" "Warren," Declan whispered. He's at work." "Okay. We'll call your dad as soon as help gets here. For now, keep talking. Tell me everything about that basketball. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now back to the story. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. By then, Solomon had moved Declan to the sheltered side of the old mill building, out of the wind, wrapped in both his leather jacket and the emergency blanket he kept in his motorcycle saddlebag. The boy was still conscious, still shivering, still talking in fragments about his basketball and his dad, and how he was going to be in so much trouble. The paramedics took over with practiced efficiency, IV lines, warm fluids, heated blankets. One of them, a woman named Yolanda, who recognized Solomon from his years as a medic, looked at him with something like awe. "You crawled out on that ice," she said. "Didn't have much choice. You could have gone through yourself." Solomon shrugged. "Wouldn't have been the first time I risked my life for someone else's kid." Yolanda shook her head. "They're taking him to Clarksville General, pediatric warming protocol. He's going to make it because of you." "He's going to make it because he held on," Solomon corrected. "Kid had a grip like you wouldn't believe." Declan's parents arrived at the hospital 47 minutes after the ambulance. Warren and Camille Frazier burst through the doors of the pediatric emergency department with the particular panic of parents who had received the worst phone call of their lives. Their son had fallen through ice. Their son had almost drowned. Their son was alive, but barely, and they hadn't been there to save him. Solomon was in the waiting room when they arrived. He had ridden his motorcycle to the hospital and refused to leave until he knew the boy was going to be okay. Now he sat in a plastic chair with his wet clothes clinging to his skin, his leather jacket gone, his body still running on adrenaline that hadn't faded yet. Warren Frazier saw him and stopped. "Are you the man who—" Solomon stood. "I'm Solomon Achebe. I was riding past the mill when I saw your son go through the ice." Camille made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. She crossed the waiting room in 3 steps and threw her arms around Solomon, this stranger in a motorcycle vest, this man who had crawled across cracking ice to save her child. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Solomon hugged her back gently, the way he would have hugged his own sisters if they were here. "He's a tough kid, Mrs. Frazier. He held on until I could reach him. That's not nothing." Warren joined them, shaking Solomon's hand with a grip that trembled. "The doctors say he's going to be fine. Full recovery. No permanent damage." Solomon felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's good. That's really good. How can we ever repay you?" Warren asked. "What you did, crawling out on that ice, you could have died." "I was in the right place at the right time," Solomon said. "That's all. No repayment necessary." But Warren Frazier was not the kind of man to let a debt go unpaid. He looked at Solomon with eyes that were red-rimmed but determined. "You saved my son's life," he said. "I don't care what you say. That means something. That means everything. If Bike Diaries has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below. And hit that hype button if you haven't already." Now back to the story. Declan spent 3 days in the hospital. Solomon visited every day. The first visit, Declan was mostly asleep, his body recovering from the trauma of hypothermia. Solomon sat in the corner and talked quietly with Camille, learning that Declan was their only child, that he loved basketball more than anything, that he had been begging for lessons at the community center, but they couldn't afford them yet. The second visit, Declan was awake and alert, full of questions about motorcycles and what it felt like to ride, and whether Solomon had ever done anything really cool like in the movies. Solomon answered patiently, showing him pictures on his phone of the Iron Covenant's charity, rides, the toy drives they did at Christmas, the community events they hosted throughout the year. The third visit, Declan asked the question that Solomon had been waiting for. "Why did you save me?" Solomon considered his answer carefully. "What you mean? You didn't know me. You could have just called for help and waited. But you crawled out on the ice. My mom said you could have fallen through too. Why would you do that for someone you don't even know?" Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I was in the army, I was a medic. Do you know what that is?" Declan nodded. "A doctor for soldiers, something like that. My job was to save people who were hurt, and I learned something important doing that job. I learned that every life matters, not just the people you know, not just the people who look like you or live near you or go to your school. Every single person has a life that matters to someone." He leaned forward. "When I saw you fall through that ice, I didn't think about whether I knew you. I thought about your mom and dad, who would lose their son if nobody helped. I thought about your teachers and friends and everyone who would miss you. And I thought about me, 20 years ago, when I needed someone to save my life, and a stranger I never met pulled me out of a situation I couldn't escape on my own." Declan's eyes were wide. "Someone saved you?" "Someone saved me," Solomon confirmed. "A medic I never even learned the name of. He pulled me out of a burning vehicle in a place I can't tell you about, and he died 3 weeks later from injuries he got saving someone else. I never got to thank him, but I promised myself that I would pay it forward, that I would be the person who shows up every time, no matter what. So you saved me because someone saved you?" Solomon smiled. "I saved you because you're worth saving. The same way I was worth saving. The same way everyone is worth saving." The town of Millbrook heard about what happened at Henderson Mill Pond. The story spread the way small town stories do, through whispered conversations at the grocery store and breathless retellings at the diner, and eventually a front-page article in the Millbrook Gazette with the headline, "Biker, Hero Saves Drowning Boy." The Iron Covenant received interview requests they politely declined. Solomon received handshakes and free coffee and offers of gratitude that embarrassed him more than anything. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it because a child was drowning and he was there. But something good came from the attention. The town finally fenced the Henderson Mill Pond. It had been on the agenda for 15 years, always pushed back for budget reasons, always deemed less urgent than other projects. Now, with the 7-year-old's near-death fresh in everyone's memory, the fence went up in 3 weeks. Chain link, 8 feet high, with warning signs every 20 feet, and a gate that locked at sunset. The Iron Covenant contributed $2,000 to the project. Warren Frazier, who worked as a contractor, donated the labor. The elementary school held an assembly about ice safety that every child in Millbrook attended. And in the center of it all, getting more attention than he wanted and less than he deserved, was Solomon Achebe, who had simply been riding past at the right moment and refused to look away. Spring came early that year, warm winds melting the ice that had almost claimed a child's life. By March, the pond was liquid again, its dangers temporarily invisible. The fence stood guard anyway, a permanent reminder of what had almost happened and what had been prevented. Declan Frazier was fully recovered, back at school, back to playing basketball in the driveway, with the ball that had started everything. He had been grounded for a month for going onto the ice. He accepted the punishment without complaint. He knew how close he had come. He also knew that he had a new friend. Solomon came by the Fraser house every few weeks, first to check on Declan's recovery, then just because he enjoyed the kid's company. They shot hoops in the driveway. They talked about motorcycles and the army and what Declan wanted to be when he grew up. They developed the easy rapport of two people who had shared something profound, even if one of them was 7 and the other was 51. On the 1-year anniversary of the rescue, the Fraser family hosted a dinner and invited Solomon and several members of the Iron Covenant. Declan, now 8, stood up at the table and gave a speech he had practiced for a week. 1 year ago, he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness, I did something really stupid. I walked out on thin ice to get a basketball, and I fell through. And I almost died. He paused, looking at Solomon. But I didn't die, because Solomon was there. He saw me when nobody else did. He crawled out onto ice that could have broken under him. He pulled me out and kept me warm until help came. He saved my life. Declan reached under the table and pulled out a small wrapped gift. I made this for you, he said, handing it to Solomon, because you said you never got to thank the person who saved you. But I get to thank the person who saved me. So this is me saying thank you for being there, for seeing me, for not driving past. Solomon unwrapped the gift. Inside was a hand-painted picture frame containing a photograph of Solomon and Declan at the hospital, taken on the day Declan was discharged. Around the frame, in Declan's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being in the right place at the right time." Solomon couldn't speak for a long moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "This is beautiful, Declan. I'll keep it forever." Declan grinned. "I know. That's why I made it. Thank you for watching this story about a 7-year-old boy who fell through the ice when nobody was watching, and the biker who happened to be riding past and refused to look away. It was inspired by the approximately 30 lives lost each year to ice-related drownings, and the countless more saved by bystanders who act without hesitation. If you live near frozen water, please learn the signs of unsafe ice. 4 inches of clear ice is the minimum for walking. Stay away from ice near moving water, docks, or shorelines. And if you see someone fall through, call 911 first, then try to reach them with something they can grab without putting yourself on the ice. The American Red Cross offers water safety training, including ice rescue techniques. Safe Kids Worldwide has resources for teaching children about winter water dangers. Your local fire department may offer community ice safety programs. Subscribe to Bike Diaries. Hit that hype button to boost this video. And if you want to support what we do, the membership link is below. Share this with everyone who needs to remember that being in the right place at the right time is never an accident. That one person can make the difference between tragedy and survival, and that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply not drive past. Declan Fraser is 11 now. He plays point guard on his middle school basketball team, still uses the ball his father gave him, and volunteers every winter with the fire department's ice safety education program. He tells the younger kids about the day he fell through, about the 6 minutes that almost ended his life, about the stranger who became family. Solomon Achebe is 55. He still rides with the Iron Covenant, still takes the back roads when traffic is bad, still carries an emergency blanket in his saddlebag, just in case. The picture frame Declan made him sits on his mantle, a daily reminder that paying it forward is never finished. The Henderson Mill Pond is fenced now, safe for the first time in decades. The warning signs are new, bright, impossible to miss. Every child in Millbrook knows the story of what happened there, of the boy who fell and the biker who saved him. Every winter, Solomon rides past the old mill and looks at the fence and thinks about the medic who saved him 20 years ago, the one he never got to thank. He hopes, wherever that man is now, that he knows the chain continued. He hopes he knows it was worth it.